My name is Andrew Pearson, and I'll never forget the night my wife told a table of Austin's business elite that Drew doesn't get to decide where I go or who I'm with. They all laughed like she'd just delivered the punchline to the world's cruelest joke, and I stood there holding my scotch, feeling something in my chest crack like expensive crystal hitting marble. 3 days later, after her little business trip to Dallas, she called me 16 times before I finally picked up. But I'll get to that. You need to understand how we got there. I'd spent 12 years building my territory as regional sales director for MedTech Solutions, covering everything from Austin to Oklahoma City. Nothing glamorous about pharmaceutical sales, but it's strategic work that had put us in a 750,000 home in Cedar Park with granite countertops and a 3-car garage. My wife Jessica worked commercial real estate, luxury properties mainly, the kind where she'd post Instagram photos of million-dollar lake houses with captions about closing deals in paradise. We'd been married 8 years, not perfect, but profitable. At least that's what I thought. Through most of our marriage, Friday nights were for networking events at the Austin Country Club, Sundays were for brunch at South Congress, then yard work around our perfectly manicured suburban kingdom. Summers were for lake house rentals and charity fundraisers, where Jessica could work her charm on potential clients. Nothing extraordinary, just the standard upper-middle-class Texas dream. But somewhere in the last year, Jessica started drifting. It began small, staying late after showings, saying she needed to decompress with colleagues. I didn't think much of it initially. Real estate is a relationship-driven business, but then it became 3 nights a week, then 4. She upgraded her wardrobe, started talking about personal branding, and began treating her phone like it contained state secrets. I'd ask about her day, and she'd give me bullet points like I was interrupting a board meeting. She started keeping her phone face down during dinner, even when we were alone. When I'd walk into our home office, she'd minimize her laptop screen and say, "Just finishing up some client research." Not an ounce of explanation, just professional deflection. The changes were subtle but unmistakable. New perfume, a Victoria's Secret charge on our Amex that she claimed was for a client gift, gym sessions that started lasting 3 hours instead of 1. She'd come home energized in a way that had nothing to do with endorphins and everything to do with secrets. I started paying attention to details I'd previously ignored. The way she'd smile at her phone during dinner, how she'd developed an extensive knowledge of downtown Austin's restaurant scene, despite claiming she always ate lunch at her desk. The fact that her client dinners seemed to happen exclusively on nights when I had regional conference calls. But I didn't confront her, not yet. 12 years in pharmaceutical sales had taught me that accusations without evidence just make you look desperate and paranoid. Instead, I watched and I documented and I waited for the moment when everything would become clear. The moment everything shifted came on a warm October evening at the MedTech Annual Networking Gala. Jessica had insisted on attending, said it would be good for both our careers. The event was at the Four Seasons downtown, the kind of affair where everyone's trying to outdress and out-network each other. I was working the room, making the usual small talk with regional managers and potential accounts, when I noticed Jessica holding court at a corner table with several of her real estate colleagues. I recognized most of them. Sandra from Compass, David from Cooper Sotheby's, people I'd met at various industry mixers over the years. They were deep in conversation, wine glasses half empty, the kind of animated discussion that happens when professionals think they're off the record. I walked over with 2 glasses of champagne, trying to be the supportive husband, when one of them asked Jessica about her upcoming market research trip to Dallas. The question hung in the air for a moment, and I could see Jessica's micro-expression shift from relaxed to calculating in the span of a heartbeat. She glanced at me, then back at the table, and I could practically see her making a decision about how much truth to reveal. What she chose shocked me more than any lie could have. Jessica waved her hand dismissively in my direction and said, "Oh, please, Drew doesn't get to decide where I go or who I'm with. I'm a grown woman running my own business." The casual dismissal in her tone cut deeper than the words themselves. She wasn't just establishing independence. She was publicly diminishing me in front of people whose respect I'd spent years building. The whole table erupted in knowing laughter. Even Jessica laughed, like she was auditioning for a different marriage, like the idea of consulting her husband about anything was quaint and outdated, and I felt something burn inside me, Rage, shame, humiliation, all wrapped up in a ball of fire that threatened to explode right there in front of Austin's business elite. But I didn't let it show. 12 years of managing difficult clients and hostile negotiations had taught me how to control my expression even when my world was collapsing. I just forced a smile and said, "Champagne, anyone?" Like I hadn't just been emotionally eviscerated in public. Inside I was shaking, not from anger, though there was plenty of that, but from something deeper, the sudden, crystal-clear realization that I'd been married to a stranger for months, maybe years. The woman I'd built a life with had just announced to our professional community that I was irrelevant to her decisions. Later that night, after the event wound down and we drove home in silence through the winding streets of Cedar Park, I sat in our home office staring at my wedding ring under the LED desk lamp. The platinum band caught the light, throwing tiny reflections across my desk like scattered promises. The clock on my computer hummed, the neighborhood outside was dead quiet, and I turned the platinum band between my fingers, realizing it didn't feel like a promise anymore. It felt like evidence of poor judgment. I thought about ripping it off and throwing it in the trash, imagining it clattering against the bottom of our stainless steel kitchen garbage can. But instead, I whispered to myself, "She laughed at me in front of everyone who matters." And that's when something fundamental shifted inside me. Not rage, not desperation, but clarity. The kind of cold, strategic clarity that had made me successful in a cutthroat industry where relationships determine everything and trust is the most valuable currency. The next few days were quiet, but not peacefully so. Jessica was distracted, constantly checking her phone, smiling at messages she wouldn't share. She'd developed a habit of stepping onto our back patio to take certain calls, claiming the reception was better outside. When I'd join her for what I thought might be a romantic moment under the stars, she'd wrap up whatever conversation she was having with a quick, "I'll call you back." Her explanation was always work-related, just coordinating with the staging company or discussing marketing strategy with the team. But her voice had a different quality during these calls, softer and more animated than it ever was when she talked business with me around. When she announced she was taking a market research trip to Dallas to scout high-end properties in the Park Cities area, the lie was transparent enough to read a newspaper through. I asked who she was meeting with, which properties she planned to visit, whether she needed me to review any of the financial projections. She shrugged. "Just some industry contacts. You wouldn't know them." Which was interesting, considering I'd met most of her professional network at various events over the years. Austin's luxury real estate community isn't that large, and after 8 years of marriage, I knew the major players at every firm from Compass to Cooper Sotheby's. I nodded like a man who hadn't just had his intelligence insulted. That night, lying in our king-size bed listening to her breathe like nothing had changed, I felt a mixture of heartbreak and clarity that I hadn't experienced since my father died. If she was truly done with us, with me, then I needed to face it. Not with shouting, not with confrontation, but with something smarter. The same strategic thinking that had made me successful in pharmaceutical sales. Before dawn, I got up, made myself a cup of coffee with our expensive Breville espresso machine, and sat at the kitchen island. And I made a decision. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to fight for someone who'd already mentally moved out. I wasn't going to lose my dignity to someone who'd thrown hers away at a networking event. I whispered into our silent kitchen, if she wants freedom, she'll have it. That was the moment everything changed. By the time Jessica walked out the door with her Toomey travel bag, checking her phone instead of saying goodbye, I wasn't the same man who'd stood humiliated at the Four Seasons. I didn't argue about her trip. I didn't ask for details about her itinerary. I didn't try to guilt her into staying. I just watched her Lexus GX disappear down our tree-lined street, and in that moment, she handed me all the leverage I needed. When Jessica pulled out of our circular driveway that Thursday afternoon, I stood at our floor-to-ceiling living room windows and watched her taillights disappear behind the neighbor's pristine landscaping. The autumn sun filtered through the oak trees, and for a moment, I wondered how many times I'd watched her leave without really understanding she was already gone. This time, I saw everything clearly. I didn't track her location on Find My iPhone. I didn't call to wish her luck with her property research. I didn't text her about dinner plans or weekend arrangements. I just let the silence settle over our 4,200 square foot house like dust on unused furniture. And then I got to work. The first call was to Russell Campbell, a retired Austin Police Department captain who'd become a friend through various charity functions we'd both attended. Russell had spent 30 years working everything from white-collar crime to domestic investigations before retiring to a consulting practice that helped executives navigate sensitive situations. We met at Café Nose on South First, a place where serious conversations happen over serious coffee and nobody pays attention to other people's business. Russell was already there when I arrived, reading the Wall Street Journal like he was still working cases. He had that quality that career law enforcement develops, the ability to assess situations without judgment while calculating all possible outcomes. He looked up as I sat down across from him. "You look like someone who just discovered his portfolio's been embezzled," he said, folding his newspaper with the practiced precision of someone who'd spent decades organizing evidence. I let out a breath I'd been holding for weeks. "Jessica's in Dallas, and she didn't go alone." Russell didn't nod, didn't ask unnecessary questions, didn't offer sympathy. He just dealt with reality using 30 years of experience investigating human behavior at its most deceptive. "Smart Money says this isn't her first research trip," he said quietly. "You want to catch them in the act?" The question hung between us like a legal document waiting to be signed. "No," I said immediately. "I want to protect myself legally and financially. I want to make sure that when this ends, I'm not the one left holding the bag." Russell smiled, one of those small, approving expressions experienced men give when someone finally understands the difference between winning and surviving. "Smart," he said. "Emotion makes people stupid. Strategy makes them dangerous." That was the thing about Russell. He never judged, never lectured. He just dealt with reality using 3 decades of law enforcement experience. "First thing you do," he said, "is document everything. Financial records, communication patterns, behavioral changes. Build a timeline that would hold up in court." He laid out a strategy that wasn't vindictive or emotional, just professionally thorough. "Texas is a community property state," he explained, "but documentation protects your interests. You don't want to be the guy who gets blindsided by hidden assets or surprise debt." For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was back in control, not of Jessica, not of the situation, but of my own response to it. After coffee, I drove straight to Austin Community Bank on Barton Springs Road. The lobby smelled like leather and opportunity, all marble floors and understated wealth. A young personal banker named Michelle helped me restructure our accounts. Nothing illegal, nothing sneaky, just basic asset protection that any financial advisor would recommend during uncertain times. I moved my salary and commission payments into individual accounts while leaving joint household expenses accessible, smart money management disguised as routine banking. "Planning any major purchases?" Michelle asked as we finished the paperwork. "Just preparing for some potential changes," I said, which wasn't technically a lie. Divorce qualified as a change, and in Texas, preparation meant survival. Walking back to my BMW 540i, I felt a strange mixture of grief and clarity settle in my chest. I sat behind the wheel for a moment, staring through the windshield at downtown Austin's skyline, all those glass towers reaching toward a sky that suddenly seemed wider than it had that morning. Then I looked at my wedding ring again. For 8 years it had meant partnership, shared goals, building something together that would last. Now it felt like a restraining device, something that kept me attached to someone who'd already cut me loose emotionally. I whispered into the empty car, "When did we stop being on the same team?" My voice cracked slightly. Grief hits hardest when you're alone with expensive German engineering and the ruins of your assumptions about the person you married. I wiped my eyes and started the engine. My next stop was Monica Torres, a family attorney whose office occupied the 32nd floor of a downtown high-rise on Congress Avenue. Her conference room had a view of Lady Bird Lake that probably cost more per month than most people's salaries, but it was worth every penny for the strategic advantage it represented. I told her everything without drama, without embellishment, just facts presented like a quarterly sales report. Recent behavioral changes, suspicious travel patterns, financial irregularities, and the public humiliation that had crystallized everything into focus. She listened quietly, taking notes on legal letterhead that cost more per page than most people spend on lunch. When I finished, she said, "Andrew, you're handling this intelligently. Texas is a community property state, but proper documentation protects your interests. You don't need to file today, but preparation gives you options. No lectures, no relationship counseling, just clear legal guidance delivered with the same professional competence I'd expect from any high-priced consultant. The key," she continued, "is maintaining the moral and legal high ground. Document everything, but don't cross any lines. Let her behavior speak for itself." I left her office feeling strategically positioned, but emotionally raw. Driving across the Pennybacker Bridge with Lake Austin sparkling below, a wave of sadness hit me so hard I had to grip the steering wheel tighter. I whispered, "I thought we had more time." The hill country stretched out around me, all those expensive houses built by people who thought they were building forever. How many of them were going through the same quiet dissolution I was experiencing? How many of those perfectly manicured lawns hid marriages that were already dead but still breathing? That night, I walked through our master bedroom and saw evidence of her absence everywhere. Phone charger missing from her nightstand. Her pillow still holding the impression of someone who'd already mentally moved out. The slight disarray that comes when someone packs quickly for a trip they're excited about. I sat on the edge of our California king mattress and let it all settle. The weight of 8 years, the dreams we'd shared, the future we'd planned that now felt like a business proposal that had been rejected after careful consideration. I remembered the early years, weekend trips to Fredericksburg for wine tastings, watching UT games at alumni events, the way she used to lean against me during movies on our sectional sofa. Now she couldn't even make eye contact without irritation creeping into her expression. Before I drowned in those memories, I forced myself back into motion. I went to our 3-car garage, climbed a stepladder, and adjusted our Ring security camera system. Legal, property-based monitoring, nothing that crossed any ethical lines, but comprehensive enough to document who came and went from our home. The cameras were already there. We'd installed them after a rash of package thefts in Cedar Park the previous year. I just repositioned them for better coverage of the driveway and front entrance. Nothing invasive, nothing that violated anyone's privacy, just better documentation of activity on our property. It was nearly 11 p.m. when I saw headlights turning into our neighborhood and moved to the front window. I didn't hide or pretend to be asleep. I just watched with the calm attention of someone conducting a business audit. A black Mercedes G-Wagon pulled into our driveway, the same one I'd seen at several networking events over the past year, driven by Charles Hoffman, a corporate attorney from Hoffman & Associates, one of downtown Austin's more prestigious law firms. I watched through the camera feed on my phone as Jessica stepped out of the passenger side, laughing at something on her screen, looking happier and more animated than I'd seen her in months. She looked radiant, not guilty, not conflicted, but genuinely content in a way that had nothing to do with luxury real estate or professional success. And all I could think was, some things don't belong to you anymore. She grabbed her overnight bag from the back seat while Charles waited, engine running like a getaway car. When she finally walked toward our front door, the Mercedes disappeared into the night without hesitation. No lingering goodbye, no romantic moment under our porch light. Just a business transaction completing itself. I didn't open the door for her. I didn't turn on lights. I didn't speak. Instead, I texted Russell. Confirmed, black G-Wagon, corporate attorney from Hoffman & Associates downtown. His response came immediately. Understood, Charles Hoffman. His wife, Amanda, works at Goldman Sachs. I'll handle contact tomorrow. That was crucial. Russell didn't interfere or manipulate. He simply provided information to interested parties and let them make their own decisions. Professional courtesy between adults who deserve to know the truth about their spouses. Inside, I packed a small duffel with essentials, clothes, toiletries, important documents, my father's watch, and drove to a storage facility near Austin Bergstrom International. I rented a climate-controlled unit, not because I planned to leave permanently, but because preparation prevents panic. As I locked the metal door behind me, I said quietly, "Never again will I be caught unprepared." By the time I returned home, dawn was breaking over the hill country, painting our neighborhood in soft gold light, and my marriage felt more dead than the armadillos scattered along Highway 71. Jessica slept until nearly noon, which didn't surprise me. She always slept well when her conscience was clear, or when she'd convinced herself that what she was doing fell within acceptable boundaries of a modern marriage. The house felt strangely peaceful, like everything in it knew change was coming. Even our Sub-Zero refrigerator seemed to hum differently, and the granite countertops reflected light in ways that looked somehow final. I made coffee using our Italian Breville espresso machine, the same blend we'd special ordered from a roastery in Portland, but it tasted like expensive disappointment. Around noon, she finally appeared in our kitchen, hair still messy from whatever had happened in Dallas that had nothing to do with commercial real estate. She poured coffee without acknowledging me, scrolling through her phone like I was furniture that had somehow learned to breathe. "Morning," I said, my voice perfectly neutral. She shrugged without looking up. "Yeah." Not "good morning," not even eye contact, just a single syllable that communicated everything about where we stood as a couple. She didn't mention Dallas, didn't explain the Mercedes in our driveway, didn't bother constructing even a basic lie about her trip. She simply didn't care enough to pretend anymore, and that indifference hurt more than any betrayal could have. She left for a showing around 1 p.m. No goodbye, no estimated return time, no kiss on the cheek that had become routine over 8 years of marriage. Just grabbed her keys and walked out like she was leaving a hotel room she'd never see again. The moment her Lexus disappeared around the corner, I exhaled slowly, the kind of breath you take before lifting something heavy or letting something precious go. Then I made the call that would change everything. "Amanda, this is Andrew Pearson. Russell Campbell gave me your number. I think we need to talk." 2 hours later, I was sitting across from Amanda Hoffman at Suerte on East 6th Street, one of those places where Austin's financial elite conduct business that requires discretion. Amanda was elegant, professional, exactly the kind of woman you'd expect to find managing portfolio accounts worth more than most people's annual salaries. She'd agreed to meet after Russell's introduction, though she didn't know specifics yet. What struck me immediately was her composure. She had the same controlled demeanor that successful people develop when they're used to receiving difficult information without losing their emotional center. Over coffee and small plates that neither of us touched, I explained the situation without malice, just facts delivered like a quarterly earnings report. Timeline, behavioral changes, the public humiliation at the Four Seasons, the surveillance footage, the pattern of deception that had become impossible to ignore. She listened with the same professional attention she probably gave to client presentations, asking clarifying questions like she was conducting due diligence on a potential investment that might affect her long-term portfolio. "How long has this been going on?" she asked quietly. "Based on the changes I can document, probably 6 months, possibly longer." She nodded, processing information with the efficiency that had made her successful in high-stakes finance. "Charles has been working late frequently," she said. "New client," he claimed. "Big corporate merger that required extensive after-hours research." She paused, her expression shifting slightly. I suppose that wasn't entirely untrue. When I finished, she said simply, "I appreciate your directness, Andrew. Charles and I will need to have some conversations." She didn't cry, didn't rage, didn't promise revenge. She just processed the information like the financial professional she was. As we left the restaurant, she turned to me. "You know, I've been wondering why he's been so interested in Austin real estate market trends lately. He kept asking about luxury property values in Cedar Park." She smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Now I understand his sudden interest in our local market conditions." 2 days later, everything converged with the precision of a well-executed business plan. I was in my home office reviewing quarterly projections when the Ring camera alerted me to movement in the driveway. Charles's Mercedes was back, and this time both he and Jessica got out together, laughing like they owned not just my house, but the entire neighborhood. They walked toward our front door with the casual confidence of people who thought they were playing a private game with someone too stupid to notice the rules. But as they reached the porch, Amanda's silver Audi Q7 pulled into the driveway behind them. She stepped out wearing a charcoal business suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payment, moving with the purposeful stride of someone conducting unpleasant but necessary business. "Charles!" she called out, her voice cutting through the October afternoon air like a legal document being served. "I believe this belongs to you." She handed him a small envelope, which I later learned contained his keycard to their shared downtown condo. and printed copies of his recent American Express statements showing expensive dinners at Jeffrey's, hotel rooms at the Driscoll, and jewelry purchases from Tiffany that had never made it home to her. The silence that followed was spectacular. Jessica went pale, understanding immediately that her carefully constructed world had just collapsed. Charles looked like he'd been audited by the IRS and found guilty of federal tax evasion. Amanda maintained the professional composure that had made her successful managing high-net-worth portfolios during market volatility. "I just wanted to return his property," Amanda said loud enough for our neighbors to hear, her voice carrying the authority of someone who delivered difficult news to clients who'd lost millions. "He won't be needing access anymore." Then she got back in her Audi and drove away, leaving Charles and Jessica standing in our driveway like actors who'd forgotten their lines in front of a live audience. The whole interaction had taken less than 3 minutes, but it felt like watching a perfectly executed hostile takeover. That evening, I changed our locks. Professional installation, high-security deadbolts, the kind of upgrade that any homeowner might make after a break-in in the neighborhood. When Jessica returned from whatever awkward conversation she'd had with Charles, her key wouldn't work. I sat in our living room, completely calm, listening to her try the lock repeatedly. The sound of metal scraping against metal, then frustrated jiggling, then the sharp click of someone trying to force something that no longer belonged to them. The knocking started soft, then grew insistent. "Andrew, the door won't open." I didn't respond, just sat there with my hands folded, breathing slow and controlled, like I was meditating on the sound of someone discovering consequences. My phone lit up with her first call. I let it ring, watching her name appear and disappear on the screen like a stock ticker showing a company in freefall. Call number 2 came 30 seconds later. Still angry, still entitled, still believing she controlled the narrative of our relationship. "Andrew, this isn't funny. Open the door." The voicemail was sharp, commanding, the tone she used when the Wi-Fi went out, or her favorite restaurant was fully booked. By call number 6, the tone shifted. "Okay, look, can we just talk for a second?" By call number 10, desperation crept in. "Andrew, please. I'm cold and I just want to come inside." The October night was getting chilly, and her voice had lost its edge, replaced by something that almost sounded like vulnerability. By call number 16, she was crying. "I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. Please let me in." The progression from entitlement to panic to desperation was like watching a pharmaceutical sales cycle in reverse, from confident presentation to desperate negotiation to complete collapse. On the 17th call, I finally answered. Her relief was audible, a sharp intake of breath like someone surfacing from deep water. "Andrew, thank God. What's happening? Why can't I get inside? Why did you change the locks?" I spoke quietly, calmly, like I was explaining quarterly projections to a client who'd missed several important meetings. "Jessica, you wanted freedom from my decisions. You made that clear at the Four Seasons in front of everyone who matters in our professional community." The silence stretched long enough for reality to settle in our driveway like morning frost. Then she whispered, "What does that mean?" "It means congratulations," I said. "You're completely free now. Free from me, free from this house, free from everything we built together. You're also free from Charles, since Amanda's already handled that situation." "Andrew, please. Can we at least talk? You can't just—" But I had already hung up. For the first time in months, our house felt like home. The silence was honest instead of tense, peaceful instead of loaded with unspoken accusations and hidden resentments. 3 months later, I found myself walking along the Lady Bird Lake Trail on a Saturday morning, drinking coffee from a travel mug and watching rowing crews practice their strokes on water that reflected the downtown skyline like a mirror. The divorce had been finalized the week before. Clean, professional, equitable distribution of assets. Jessica had moved to Dallas, ostensibly to expand her real estate business into new markets, but really because Austin had become too small for the reputation she'd built. Charles had relocated to Houston after Amanda's attorney had finished with him, taking a position at a firm that specialized in bankruptcy law, which seemed appropriate. I passed the Four Seasons, the same place where she'd announced that I didn't get to make decisions about her life. The valet stand was busy with the usual weekend crowd, successful people arriving for brunch and business meetings, the same social ecosystem where she'd humiliated me in front of our professional community. I stopped for a moment, letting the memory settle without the sting it once carried. Then I smiled and kept walking. Some places you outgrow without realizing it. Some memories lose their power when you stop letting them define you. People think revenge is loud, screaming, throwing things, public confrontations that leave everyone damaged. But real revenge, the kind that changes your life instead of just ruining someone else's, is quiet. It's dignity. It's strategic patience. It's walking away from someone who didn't value you and discovering you're stronger than you ever imagined. If you've ever been laughed at by someone who promised to love you, if you've ever had to choose self-respect over false hope, if you've ever had to rebuild your life from the foundation up, I hope my story gives you courage. Because sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be anyone's backup plan. And sometimes the person who walks away wins everything that actually matters.